Hardly Hodley podcasterinos. Today I have the first repeat podcast that I've done so far with my good friend Philip Halton, editor-in-chief of Goblin Skateboarding magazine, entrepreneur, boat builder, and now a stoic monk who's got a bald head and lives in the mountains of Rathmines. This is a serious chat. We're discussing Stoic philosophy, particularly the big three Stoic thinkers, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, talking about their ideas and how they've impacted us, talking about religion, about the need for philosophy, about self-development, about standing up to tyranny. This basically ticks all the boxes, so I hope you enjoy it. Boat. So, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, you're the first person I've talked to in over 8 weeks since I decided to become a monk.
Yeah, man, I feel quite the same way myself. I haven't been, although I was down in Dublin at the weekend doing a heavy amount of socialising, which I probably shouldn't have been doing. But
yeah, it's you Nordy bastards causing all the problems.
Exactly, you know? Bringing the virus down south illegally. If there's any COVID inspectors listening to this, I'm sorry.
Well, I actually just seen the news before I came up here, and there's a new rat hotline for Donegal supposedly because they're super bold up there that they've set up a hotline for you to rat out your neighbours if that isn't to
go and tell on people.
Yeah,
that's pretty George Orwell shit. But I mean,
yeah, that's one way to absolutely fall out with your neighbours for the next 30 years. You know.
Yeah, you're not going to be super popular after that. I mean, today, so we kind of planned this out a little bit where we were going to talk about Stoicism, and because I think we've both, I mean, speaking for myself, I suppose, I've kind of come to it in the last while, obviously having a tough time with everything that's been going on, looking to make sense, I suppose, of how to deal with difficult times. And I kind of discovered something else in it. I didn't know what I expected from it. I'd never studied Stoicism. Even when I did philosophy, I never really came across it at all. Yeah. I'd heard of Marcus Aurelius, obviously, but didn't know anything particular about him. So I was kind of shocked when I started getting into it because of Donald Robertson to just see how deep it actually went, and that it's kind of an entire worldview. So I'm interested on your reading of it. What is it that you've gleaned from it? What is it that because you seem to be inspired by it like I am. What's doing it for you?
It's I suppose it's put into words a lot of the trial and error lessons that I've learned over the last few years, you know. Well, I suppose my first my first like understanding of Stoicism actually came not from Stoicism but from CBT.
Yeah.
And I found CBT to be really, really helpful for anxiety. And like in the height of my anxiety, I just stumbled across it. And I remember I got a CBT for Dummies book. If you ever want to learn the basics of anything, and there's a Dummies book for it, just get it because like they're really so. Learning a lot about CBT was very helpful for me. Now it's not until like much later that I've learned that CBT is based upon Stoicism.
Yeah. That's sick.
That like scientific methods that we've come up with in the last, I don't know, CBT is only really stretching back, I think, about 50 years, maybe 60 years. Not sure exactly. But those scientific methods are based entirely upon Stoicism. So when you read the literature, 2,000-year-old literature, and you see the similarities, it's mad. You know, it's
that's really mad. What stuck out to me as well was how modern the ideas were.
Yeah.
And how they're like psychological truths, or truths of how to live your life that are so much deeper than a lot of the self-help, self-improvement stuff that you get these days. They seem to be, they're coming really straight from the source. Like, because Marcus Aurelius, as an example, was a Roman emperor, had to deal with plagues, barbarian hordes, with like just unparalleled adversity that we don't really have anymore. And then you get the raw material of his experience. And obviously that's been worked into CBT, but the philosophy itself offers I suppose, a way of being that minimizes the suffering. Is that something you found?
Yeah, and it's a very simplistic approach as well. So there's not very much complex things that you need to understand with Stoicism. I think fundamentally, when you break Stoicism down, there's 2 points, and it makes that there are things that are inside of your control, and there are things that are outside of your control. And frankly, you should only really be concerned about the things that are inside of your control, because the externals are never ending. Like, there's a never ending amount of things that you could be worried about outside of you, you know. And so it's lasted for such a long time, but it is a simplistic approach, and I suppose it's nearly like the layman's philosophy. You know, it's like a streetwise philosophy or something.
That's cool. What you're saying there, that one, I think that was Epictetus, with the sharp kind of divide between what you can control and what you can't, and that, you know, the start of wisdom is kind of being able to tell between them. But the Stoicism thing, I mean, a lot of the philosophy I studied would have been what the Stoics thought of as like librarians of wisdom. It's about these theoretical arguments. It's about semantics. It's about how we use language. It's very academic, whereas Stoicism, as you said, is more like street philosophy. It's more like how to live your life. I've seen Stoics be described as warriors of wisdom.
It's very practical, and it's meant to be that way. And actually, a lot of the Stoic philosophers, I believe in ancient Rome, they were almost looked down upon, funny enough, because at the time, a thing called rhetoric was the big, was the main sort of philosophy. And what rhetoric was essentially learning from a book quotes and regurgitating them to try and look wise, but
so
not
basically what everybody's doing on Instagram.
Exactly, yeah. So social media today would be, well, I suppose you call them sophists. But it's rhetoric, and the idea is that you're never really learning or putting into practical use the ideas that you're spouting, and that's you can see that online, without doubt. And,
those sophists, they kind of used language to convince people of things, oftentimes that they look smart or that they were always trying to win the crowd over, so they were always saying what people wanted to hear.
Exactly. It was very much a virtue signaling exercise, right? And there's a funny thing now. I've picked up farming in the last couple of months. And here's a funny quote that I came across. I think it was from Epictetus, that if cattle had opinions, they would laugh at anyone interested in anything but the grass. And that's quite funny to me, because I just think that, if you're not towing the line of bullshit online, you're almost laughed at. It's like, well, who the fuck wants to listen to you? This person's talking about nuance and balance between certain difficult topics. Fuck that guy.
It's all one side or the other, like kind of extreme. But the Stoics are like really plain spoken. That seemed to be a big thing for them, was like not getting too up on a high horse.
No.
The whole memento mori, remember you'll die. You're just a man in the end of the day.
Exactly.
And even Aurelius, who was an emperor, with every possible advantage that you could have, and he still, studied every day and had this kind of mentality of that he was just a very simple human.
Yeah, it was meant to break down, things are meant to be broken down as simple as possible. And this is the real, there is no pretentiousness really built into Stoicism. It is very, very simplistic, and it's meant to be that way as well. But I think the difference, when you read Aurelius, the difference is he had a very beautiful way of putting thoughts together, like analogies. And when you read his text, it's very easy to envision what he's saying. I always love the sort of analogy he made with a stream. I really like that, and it's such a beautiful way to put it, in that if you were to throw mud into a stream, what would actually happen is a stream would just break it down and then quickly return to its natural state, let's say, and return to providing clean water with no asking for anything in return. And so when you look at like Stoicism, the idea is that, okay, well, you get impressions, and what impressions are, they're kind of like automatic responses to situations that happens. Someone honks the horn at us and we get a fright, and that's completely natural and it's supposed to happen. However, like what a Stoic would see is, or what a Stoic would be able to do, let's say, or the wise man would be able to do, is quickly bring that back under control, and sort of quickly rationalize that it's nothing to be afraid of. It's just a horn. And it would also not it would also make you not jump to the conclusion to get quite angry at the person who might have done it, and so he's a very beautiful way of words. I think when you read Aurelius, he is such a cool character and so impressive that you can't help but sort of fall for.
Yeah, it's that really struck me about like that. Your first reactions not being your own. I mean, a person beeping the horn at you is one thing, but then like dying of the plague with everybody kind of all your loved ones around you, and then a civil war erupting because of your death, and your family are going to be killed for power, and still maintaining this kind of sensibility of being like, well, I'm not going to make it worse by freaking out about it. I'm not going to add, as I think it's a quote from him, or it might be Epictetus, but it's like, don't add a second story to your suffering by thinking about it loads or by worrying about your suffering.
Yeah, because again, they also are quite heavy on the idea of death, and they would say that there's no reason to fear death, but there's reason to fear the fear of death. So the scare, like death is kind of indifferent to them. Like they would see, like to them, there's three things: there's good, bad, and indifferent, and only really good and bad come into play with your choices and how it affects your character. And things that are indifferent are all of the externals that you can't control, and death is one of those. It's going to happen eventually, so there's no point in really, worrying about it too much.
That reminds me of a Socrates quote that it was something like, "Death is just a person in a scary mask, and that the job of philosophy is to lift it up and see what's under it." But they must have, because I guess what I find so, what I admire so much in it is because their lives were so fraught and surrounded by death. And so, a lot of them died in very terrible ways. Like Seneca had to commit ritual suicide, basically because of Emperor Nero. So they were philosophers, but they really had to put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. Yeah, Epictetus as well, particularly. And when you read Epictetus, you kind of bear in mind that this guy has had an insane life, and he was enslaved for many years. But he was enslaved in the court of.
Was it in the Ottoman Empire as well? Or he was from the Ottoman Empire?
He was from Anatolia, I think, which is like modern day Turkey. But so he was enslaved, but he was also enslaved at the court of Nero. So he would have been around a lot of powerful people, and it's beautiful when you read him in that it was never obvious to him that these people were any more free than he was, as a slave, and the reason was that they were often enslaved by the way that they conducted themselves, and they wanted to be sort of looked upon favorably by the emperor, and so on and so forth. And the conclusion that Epictetus came to was that even though his own body was technically enslaved, the one thing that he had in his own control every day as he carried out his tasks were his mind. He recognized that your mind cannot actually be taken from you. It's the one thing that you truly own. Not even your own body, because your body can fall ill, and it's essentially external to you. So on the extreme end, like that was the thinking there. That's one of the things I was surprised about, that they put into the category of things that you can't control is your body. Yeah. As well as things like property. It's a funny one to get your head around, a body one. I was trying to think about that, but I'm like, well, I suppose it's true. You really aren't in control of your own body. Your body ages, Yeah. And illness as well. I mean, we always like to think that there's a moral reason for illness, that there's like some sort of fable that you can say, oh, you did X, Y, and Z, and that's why you got sick. And maybe a lot of the time there is, but there's also that chance factor that, you just get sick or whatever happens. It's not actually to do with you. I suppose they would have felt that quite acutely. Reading Seneca, like he was an old man when he was writing it, and most of his writing is about being sick and about bearing it with dignity rather than. Yeah, it's funny, actually, because like the top three, I suppose, in my opinion, the top three Stoic philosophers would be Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and each and every one of them suffered really bad health. Like their whole lives actually were surrounded by bad health, so they were in constant. These guys were in constant pain. So they were obviously always trying to find ways to deal with it. And do you think the philosophy was a way of dealing with that pain? It's like ancient painkillers or something. Before you had
Nurofen.
Exactly, and it's the effectiveness of it as well, though, isn't it? Because I mean, once you can have some control over your thoughts and your reactions, it is probably the most powerful thing. You know, the mind is extremely powerful. If you look at a modern day a testament to that, it might be like Wim Hof, or someone like that who just pushes things to the extremities, and oftentimes I'm not actually super knowledgeable on him, but from what I can gather, he it's more about breathing and essentially being in control of.
I can certainly relate to it, even in ways that your misconceptions of things cause more trouble than sometimes you'll try and jump to a conclusion to be ahead of the show or something, or to prevent yourself from suffering some sort of misfortune. But actually that creates the misfortune because you leapt to a conclusion without enough information in the first place. And that avoiding suffering kind of runs you straight into it. I think Aurelius has a quote of something kind of similar to that.
Well, they're and they're very easy well, they're not easy, but they are, you can change those sort of reactions, and you can put them, it, like, the thing is, like, Stoicism, it's a practical philosophy, and it takes practice. It is, I suppose you can call it meditation, but not strictly meditation in the sense that you're sort of deep breathing and trying to, get rid of your thoughts. A lot of Stoicism is really focusing quite closely on them and trying to understand, okay, I'm in a shopping center, it's very busy, a lot of people are getting close to me, I'm kind of getting a little bit riled, and it's knowing that that's happening, and it's like, all right, I'm tensing up a little bit in my shoulders, you're realizing that, and you say, but there's no need to,
that's an interesting one that I got from Donald Robertson as well, because he obviously does the blend of CBT and the Stoicism, which really contextualizes it very well. I think if you read the Stoics anyway, you'd gain a lot, but I think through Donald's interpretation of it, it mixes very well with the psychology. But even the worrying, like how your posture affects worrying. Like if you're hunched over, you're more likely to begin worrying than if you're standing up straight.
That's really interesting. I think that's probably, it's like an animal trait within us, in that if you see a dog or a cat, whenever they're preparing to sort of attack something, whatever they or if maybe they're in fear and they want to like scare something off, they will. They're going to the first thing that they'll do is they'll change their stature, and obviously, like, Stoicism is making the link all the time between the fact that we are essentially animals, but the only thing that separates us is our reason, is our ability to reason, and
also very much that we're suffering. They really have the whole kind of Buddhist life of suffering, that's the cornerstone of it. That's time. Really baked into the philosophy of being like, you're gonna have all this adversity in your life, and you need to be tooled up so that you don't become bitter by it or resentful or get made into a bad guy, basically. I think their values are very interesting. This is something that's kind of attracted me. I think Stoicism's kind of become, it could be a modern religion for non-religious people, basically.
It could be.
It has that potential to be a worldview that people can kind of form a community around.
The interesting thing in that is that the only reason that we probably have Seneca or Epictetus and Aurelius is that the Catholic Church actually adopted quite a lot of Stoicism teachings, and that, like, the thing is, like, like, these were pagan time, like, these guys were essentially pagans to the Catholics, and they oftentimes destroyed very many texts because they were trying to brainwash everyone. But no, really. Like, the only reason that they even survive is because the Catholic Church decided to take them on. So you kind of wonder how many guys that you might not even know anything about
has come into the Bible and has come into Catholicism. Well, there's definitely interlinking. That's something I'm very interested in, really, is the connection between those, because where these guys come in, I mean, I think Marcus Aurelius was something like, what was he, 33 or 49 AD possibly? He was after Christ.
Yes. Well, Seneca was born roughly around
the same time. I think he was like 33 BC or something, and
he was a bit past it,
But it's interesting that they come in at this pivotal time in history when you have, like, Julius Caesar has kind of destroyed the democracy of Rome, and the Roman Empire is declining, really, and has been declining for a while. But, well, I suppose it expands to its biggest reach under Aurelius, and then starts to decline after. But it's it's interesting that they're at such a pivotal point in history, but it's so connected to now. I
Yeah.
don't get how, I mean, why are we able to read people's words from 2000 years ago? And I read Seneca and I go, holy shit, this is stuff that's like, this relates to what I'm doing in my life. I mean, there's the environment that we inhabit is so different and so much time has passed. Yet there's these universal things that seem to overlap in it.
I think it's that the saying that like history doesn't repeat but it rhymes. In that there's a lot of similarities between. I mean, the Antonine Plague was going on for 15 years when Aurelius was in power, and I suppose there's an interesting comparison between what's happening now and that what appears to be America. The foundations of America are starting to become shaky, and that was always.
Well, this is the culture wars, I suppose, is something that has interested me because the return of Stoicism, I mean, Stoicism, like Socrates and those boys are the foundations of Western society. Like they're kind of the earliest, and a lot of people get interested in Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophies and things, but Stoicism is kind of the Western equivalent of that. It is our original kind of. Well, if you could say R, I suppose it's maybe a bit far removed from that.
Well, I see that it's still quite prevalent in Eastern Europe. Like I think Russians have a more sort of stoic outlook on life than I think America. Like more Western ideals are probably centered around materialism, and it's not that Stoicism says that that's a bad thing. It's preferred to have wealth rather than be poor, obviously, but not at the expense of virtue,
of your character,
But
that's interesting because they always have the rival with the Epicureans.
That's right.
That correctly, and their philosophy was something like pleasure.
Exactly.
They were aimed at,
exactly.
So if you can lie on the couch all day, that's a great thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. The fundamental idea was, how do you achieve happiness? And like happiness is the end goal, whereas Stoicism is more like, I suppose it's more about, it's more realistic to be honest.
Yeah. The end goal of Stoicism seems to be very different, as in it's not about avoiding pain. It's about being able to continue despite being in pain. In a way,
it shuns excess as well. It's certainly
it's very minimalist, very simple.
It is minimalist and it's simple, and it's like if you're at a dinner table and don't grab your plate or whatever it is, and if it passes you, just be calm and wait for it to come back around again, and if it doesn't, enjoy yourself still.
But I see kind of a similar dichotomy, I suppose, in our culture, in that you have this kind of self-improvement sphere, which is all about delayed gratification, and then you have another side that's quite about hedonism and nihilism and about excess. And I kind of wonder, we're in this kind of ancient Greek phase, or this kind of, we're in a similar, there's something that's drawing people to Stoicism now, I think, and I think it's because it's reflected in this strange time that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, it's definitely it's like it goes in waves. I mean, I know the popularity of it. I think it increased around the 17th century for some reason, and then it sort of drops off again.
Yeah,
but the thing is, it has survived in one way or another. Like the teachings haven't really been forgotten. Now they have become more or less popular, but to survive such a long time, there has to be some sort of truth in there. There has to be something that there has to be a value in there that. And it's again, it isn't a very complex idea, really. It's and the most impressive thing is that through the advent of science, it's actually proven its worth scientifically as well. Like this is philosophy, and this is really just thinking, and thinking about like what is good and bad and stuff like that. But the teachings have actually come into its own scientific realm now as well,
and that it actually has the power to give you the sense of ease or sense of emotional wisdom, the phronesis, to tell the difference between what's real and what's not real, what's good and what's bad. Again, to go back to where it kind of came about, is I think it's interesting that I was watching a bit on Julius Caesar lately. I've gotten kind of into his story because it's just so, I mean, it's mental, really.
Yeah.
what he did in terms of taking over Rome and becoming the first emperor, and he kind of set the scene for the stories after that and the other emperors, including Aurelius.
Hmm.
But there was that aspect as well that of might is right, and that you wanted absolute power, and they were a giant empire, the Romans. I mean, they were the largest empire that the world's ever seen, and they had slaves, and they had this massive kind of something that had never been seen before on Earth, and how this philosophy grew out of that, I suppose, is I do wonder about the relationship between the ideals of power and what the Stoic ideal is, which is wisdom and temperance.
Yeah. If you look at Aurelius's example, the moment he was granted power, the moment he became emperor, he split that power in half straight away and gave it to, I think it was his half-brother.
Yeah. And Lucius, who was a bit of a party animal.
He was a party animal.
Out drinking cans and
womanizing. And he died early. Everyone thought that he was actually going to be the long-term emperor because Aurelius always had poor health, but it ended up being the complete opposite.
That he was just drinking the bag out the whole time.
He died in excess. And, Aurelius, he's just such an interesting character, even in that when Rome... So if you take into consideration when he's ruling, so you have the Marco-Manic Wars taking place. Like the northern frontier of Rome is under attack by Germanic tribes, and they're quite fierce warriors. They're very impressive warriors.
Yeah.
And then he also has a situation of civil war at one stage, along with the Antonine
The civil
Plague.
war, I think, is so funny, man. That's like, because they thought he was dead, where they thought he had died, and then his wife immediately ran and hooked up with his opposite number, who was the Roman, I think it was Cassius, who was ruling Egypt, or Syria, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, my details on this are all over the place. But he was kind of next in line to the throne, and she immediately ran to him because she knew her and her son Commodus would be killed. But then obviously Aurelius was still alive, and he was like, what the hell? Yeah. What's it? You're going to just go off and hook up with this dude, and now we're at civil war, bro.
Yeah, after he just defeated like the most fierce tribe that the Romans ever came up against,
I mean, talk about pressure, like.
Exactly. Well, this is another thing as well. Like, the only real written sources that we have from him are his own personal diary, and they were never actually intended to be used for anyone for teaching. They were just his diary and how he was writing throughout his days to cope with the things that were going on. And this is another thing that I've kind of, through trial and error over the years, I've been doing that for a long time. So when I found that out, I really resonated with it. And it made me change my style of journaling actually a bit too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because I would occasionally write down in long sort of random thought exactly what it is that's going on or any problems I might be trying to solve.
Yeah.
But I would also I've also had a daily journal now for I think 6 or 7 years or so. Like I can go back to copybooks and open up a page and tell you what I was doing this day 6 years ago. But his style of journaling is it's very deep first and foremost, and it's just, I suppose they're all coping mechanisms really. And this guy, the pressure that this guy must have been going through, he actually sold his personal items to pay off the debts of Rome, essentially. He took a lot of his personal belongings into a courtyard, sold them off, and paid the debts for many people. And
I think that's part of the appeal of the Meditations is that it is so personal, and weirdly you can empathize so much with it, despite the fact that he's a Roman emperor from 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, Stoicism was never actually meant to have any individual figure as well, but he has, I mean, for me personally, he embodies it. But, the reason, I think it was Zeno was the founder of Stoicism, but they changed it from Zenoism, I suppose, to Stoicism quite fast because they didn't want it to be centered around one person. And Stoicism actually just means stoop or step in Greek, because it was taught on the street, on a stoop. And the Irish equivalent to that is, your buddy's stoop that you might have a few beers on. So
that's where he preached the Stoic philosophy.
Well, I think Irish Stoicism is especially right now with people drinking outdoors, it's in full throttle. Most people are just drinking
drink
on
outside
steps.
in winter, you'll learn a thing or two about conditioning. But that's an interesting distinction as well in Stoicism, that a lot of people commonly think Stoicism is what stoic usually means, which is something like
That's
cold
right.
and unfeeling and like
It's toxic masculinity,
stiff
I suppose. You can
upper
call
lip
it.
kind of buzz. But
Yeah.
what stoicism actually means is there's a good quote that I like, which is that man is made of flesh and blood, not iron and stone, or something like that.
Yeah.
Their goal was to create men that were feeling, but that were capable of enduring the pain while staying feeling, rather than men that were just going to shut down and kind of just grin and bear it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the difference. There's a lowercase stoic, which means essentially would be what people refer to today as toxic masculinity, and then there's an uppercase stoic in that. Actually, a true stoic would be.
It's like the difference between real strength and a facade of strength.
Yeah, exactly.
It always kind of annoys me that people use the term toxic masculinity, to be honest, because
I understand
it kind of becomes people have this like that masculinity is like a synonym for being a big dumb idiot or something.
Right.
It's like
exactly.
If somebody's a masculine man, they're like an ape with no emotions. And whereas actually, if you read about Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman general and emperor, who I would consider to be a masculine man, although he was quite ill health and everything, a lot of it is about telling the truth. A lot of it is about facing reality head on. It's about courage. It's about wisdom. It's about integrity. It's about living so that you could be seen by everybody and not be ashamed of how you've lived.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes the toxic masculinity thing is just an oversimplification of what is a stereotypical male who's maybe not certain of themselves and pretends to be something rather than
exactly.
being.
Yeah, it'd be rhetoric in that sense. It's a false this false notion of
being
wisdom
being a phony is a universal thing. It's not something that's uniquely male, or
That's
maybe
true.
it appears in that guise. But oftentimes, I just find it as people use it as a way of demeaning men and what they're doing.
But I think it's important to bring it up because people might rub off the ideas in Stoicism as, oh well, that's toxic masculinity, but in truth, to kind of look at Stoicism and kind of follow its teachings, you have to be incredibly in touch with your feelings, more so than far more so than the average person. I actually think it's from every week you see some stupid video from a different part of the country of someone doing something ridiculous. And most of the time it's young boys or, I'm not even going to call them men. It's young boys, this really immature young boys. And they, something like Stoicism is can be quite a powerful teacher or influence on somebody. I stumbled across this when I was about 18. I was, that's at a time where you're kind of at your most confused or angry, let's say, and not knowing that it was Stoicism. I suppose it was CBT, but the similar teachings, and that had a massive impact on me. And nobody I knew had any real clue about it or anything, and it was it was whatever I was reading on my own sort of time and trying to understand things.
That's really interesting because I think there is a void. There's a big void of purpose for young men, particularly for young lads that might be a bit more aggressive, a bit more competitive, and prone to antisocial behavior. There isn't really any system to integrate them into society other than maybe the military or martial arts or something like that. Because they need a system of discipline to give them control over themselves. Otherwise, they're just going to be bad dudes. And Stoicism, I think, is very aware of that capacity for evil in each person. It seems to be very much using wisdom to find your virtues over your vices, and that's kind of the adventure. The quest is really to master yourself, and so that you're I don't know if it's necessary so that you can just be useful to other people, but so that you can to realize your potential at the highest level, to master yourself. And there's no call to action for young men to do that. That's not really what you're hearing in a lot of places. A lot of the time it's like, don't be toxically masculine, but there is no explanation of who they should be. We don't have a very good positive
I see this every week that I go online, and I understand a lot of the time where these things come from, but there isn't a day that goes by in a national newspaper where men aren't being slighted for something or other, and because there are serious issues. I mean, there are serious issues that kind of fester away over many years, and frankly, it's the weakness that can kind of get into people that cause these problems. And when I say this, I mean like treatment towards women or towards other people, and real antisocial behavior. And look, we do glorify that in modern culture. People are quick to forget that. If you go onto Netflix, like what's like some of the number one shows, it's all drug dealing and and
well,
that's and stuff like that.
That's a big. I mean, I wrote about that in that article I did, the How to Save Young Men one. Is the duplicitous nature of what. Like the plot of Breaking Bad is like school teacher, family man is a wimp, so has to become drug dealer, murderer, and we all cheer for him.
Great,
because that's an improvement. We don't. It's not. Nobody likes cowardly people. It's not a thing that we're actually attracted to, and that's fair enough. Because if a person will let you down, if a person isn't reliable, if you can't believe in a person, it's very hard to have a relationship with them. But if you're to go around encouraging young men to be courageous and to be brave, it's almost like you're trying to indoctrinate them into a cult or something. Everybody will be like, there's this suspicion that you're encouraging ambition in young men.
Yeah, so there's Jocko Willing touches on it in Extreme Ownership, and the whole idea being, and look, Stoicism is extreme ownership. It is ownership very much of your thoughts. It's breaking down exactly. The world is a very difficult place, but there's no reason for you to blame it, right? So you can take control of what it is that you need to take control of, and that is as much as you possibly can. And when you have that attitude, your day to day, it's becomes a lot easier. Frankly, you don't waste time blaming. You just take that, because your brain has a limited capacity for energy, a limited amount of energy even. So like if you're training yourself to put that towards problem solving rather than problem creating, let's say, or blaming, then it's a huge difference, and it's worked very effectively for me. I mean, from a management standpoint,
and that's an encouraging. Jocko Willing's a great example of a guy that's encouraging young men, and he's obviously a military guy. He's a martial arts guy. He's he's a hell of a specimen. Like you wouldn't mess around with him. He's kind of in filling that role of encouraging young men to take on responsibility and to do. I think as young lads, you're quite rough. I always found it really. You need the stoic thing. I thought that was really interesting. That Marcus Aurelius encourages is to pick a mentor for yourself. To pick, somebody that you admire, and then to have them in your head. And then to say, what would Socrates do? How would he
this
behave?
Person do? Yeah, exactly.
And then apply it to your behavior.
Exactly. So they're all types of, practical, I suppose you can call them meditations, but they are, that's how you practice these things. And I've done, I've written out, like certain people in my life and the things that I admire about them the most. And I would have that written down and be like, that's an ideal. That person's, my dad's work ethic and his kind of devotion to his family and like that sort of thing. And I write that down, and then this friend's compassion and their understanding and their calmness and stuff like that. And then I have you're kind of putting all these into like a perspective, all these different people that you admire the most, and you're like, all right, that's because life is a balancing act, right? Like everything that you do is a complete balancing act, and there's never, you should never be on the extreme end of anything, in my opinion. And that's what Stoicism, I think, will teach you that quite a lot as well. Is that there are no, completely like correct answers to anything. It's all a balancing act. But you pick this ideal person of who it is that you want to be, and then you follow that. You pick a character and you play the role basically.
Yeah, and that you kind of, what you admire about them tells you something about the person you would like to be. It's like it's a kind of an image that calls forth from you the best that you can be. If you could be your best self, you'd be like them in that way. And then abstracting it from them so you can have them in your head. But growing up, I didn't have anybody that I thought was like that. There might have been individual things, but there wasn't any adults in my life that I saw that I wanted to be like. There was no conventional adults that I knew that I looked up to, that I was like, I'd like to be like you. It was always like, oh, it's a trap. Don't grow up. Adults are idiots. They don't get it. So as a young man, you automatically fell into the role of rebel, of kind of antisocial, of not fitting in because I didn't see anybody that was actually encouraging as a young man, except my dad was very encouraging of me, but also he's quite unconventional in his own way. So there wasn't anybody for a long time that I saw in the culture that was like somebody like Jocko Willink who's encouraging.
Exactly,
that you could be like, oh yeah, I want to be like him. Or I want to be. There's been a there's a big
I think
void,
you can find those guys, right? You can find them virtually, but in person it's very hard. I mean, so and look, the more you know someone, the more you know their imperfections. So you probably get a little bit more. You probably narrow down on exactly what it is that you really like about them, and then you can also see the flaws. But look, in my opinion, I read a lot of history. It's like my pastime, and I look at today, and even during our lifetimes for the most part, and there's so few leaders that I can point to, real true leaders. And good leaders are very, very seldom to come by, and that's why if you look at the Pax Romana, that was Rome, for the longevity of its empire, only ever really had 5 great emperors. And you don't, in my opinion, see very much of it in public figures today. Like there's no politician in Ireland that I can point to in the last 60 years. That I would say, okay, that's a true leader. I mean, you can look up north, and I'd say John Hume, but in terms of our political
it always seems
parties,
to be so split up or something, or like you can like for me, Jordan Peterson was that leader really that at a time in my life came along and was somebody with a coherent message that was like, look, you need to put yourself together. You're not all that you could be. And it made me really think about my life and about who I wanted to be. But we need more than that. Like, it's not enough to have. I mean, that's why I like the Stoics, because for me, they give some like historical continuity to the ideal. Like, they came before religion, and yet they're also men that lived according to these ideals and these values and tried to in their own lives, despite all of the pressure. And I'd like to see. That's why I'm so inspired by it, because I think that's what's missing in our culture is more of ideals and leaders that are living up to them, and that
living up to the standards. Yeah, exactly.
And not to say to hold, to go around like, why isn't everybody else doing it? Trying to do it in my own life and failing miserably, of course, and sometimes getting better and sometimes getting worse. And, I guess something that I'd like to do myself is to hold it up more and go, this is really useful. This is what I felt was missing a lot growing up. Was that continuity between the past and the present, and between who men were and who men should be.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what has gone on with the identity politics and with feminism and with a lot of the cultural changes that have gone on in the last 100 years has just been like, don't be like men were. And that leaves us with the question of who the hell are we?
Yeah. What is a good man?
What is a good man? And, where do you find that? And I think Marcus Aurelius is somebody who I think is a good man as far as I can see. I'm sure he did some messed up shit, but
sure. I mean, you're not going to be, it's the equivalent of being the president of the United States. No matter how good you are, there's still going to be some bad things that are going to happen under your command. And that, well, there's, no matter who you put in that position, there's always going to be choices that you make that are going to have to be lesser evils.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm thinking. I mean, in my head, I have this voice that's like, well, he probably had slaves and killed loads of people and, they had an empire and all of this stuff. And you go, and that's true. But we can tear down every single person. Like, there isn't anybody that you can't say, but they do this or they're like that. And I've done that for a long time myself.
I mean, you'll be interested in this. In the Sapiens book by Yuval Noah Harari, which is a brilliant book. I recommend that to absolutely everybody. He focuses quite heavily on humans' ability to build myths, right? And Stoicism is very, it touches on that a lot. It's we probably do that too much, but all of our institutions are a myth building exercise, and so we think of powerful things like maybe the United States. We might think of powerful things like banks or institutions of any sort, right? But really, what they are is just a buildup of myths. They're okay, fair enough. They have a physical location. That's part and parcel of it, and then they use this branding, and but it's all myths. And what you see now in the West is a destabilizing like these myths. Like that's kind of what's going on, or so you'll hear destabilizing the institutions, but really it's people are kind of they're tapping away
You're
at
hitting
what
on
it is.
something very deep there, very deep, and very much what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, with all the things I've been kind of jumping around with, that the loss of a shared story that makes sense of our lives.
Right, yeah, because when you so you'll see it happen in America right now. When you break down these values, like the things that make America America, let's say, are the sort of the leaders that they look to. Look, if people were to start chipping away at, well, Thomas McDonough and Porg Pierce and and so on, and we start saying, well, they weren't good guys because this, that, and the third happened, and it's not an excuse for people who've done terrible things, but the notion behind that is actually oftentimes to kind of break this, because we mythologize these people, right? So, like the idea of Ireland in the last, let's say, century, when Fianna Fáil, well, it was initially coming together, but when Fianna Fáil really were in power, it was to back this idea of, okay, what is Ireland? The Republic of Ireland is a predominantly Catholic, whatever, centre right, maybe church conservative, just church conservative country, and this is who we are, and so on and so forth. Well, actually, like, the history of Ireland is far more complex than that. I put this out to people who are quite shocked by this, but I think it was about 70 to 75% of Dublin about 400 years ago was Protestant. And people think, wait, what? Well, yeah, look around at all the churches that you pass on a day-to-day basis. The only Catholic churches built in Dublin, for the most part, in the last 100 years, were built within the last 100 years after we got independence. Because it was it's a highly Ireland's a highly complex country. If you look back on our history, we have. You have the Celts, the Gaels, and you have Vikings and Normans, and Normans eventually become British, but they're also French, and then they eventually take over Ireland again. And so it's like, well, they're Old English and these are New English, and there's all of these different things all
That's
going
really
on.
interesting, because that was something I was speaking with Belfast playwright Jimmy McLeavy on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we were talking about that, like, Ireland being a Catholic country, and then now we're kind of just like throwing the religion out and being like, okay,
where do we stand now?
That was a mistake. But the problem is, you throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you lose. This is what I see happening in a lot of cultures, like America, even, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Say, if that's the kind of cornerstone of the whole thing, if you throw that out, you're kind of like, what do we have in common? I mean, there has to be at least one thing that we can agree on for this to even be a place, or for it to exist. And if we end up in a situation where you can't even agree on that one thing, you kind of just end up with factions and with different tribes with their own individual.
And so this is the really fascinating thing about humans, in that we're all unbelievably similar. Like, in terms of animals, where there's very little variation between us, but we highlight those small differences, be it color of your skin or your eyes or your hair. Or your religious beliefs, whatever it is. Like, if you think of this, how similar so many religions are, so many people's cultures, and a lot of the values are very, very similar, but the small differences, we blow up into these huge. Like, if you look up north, fundamentally in the north of Ireland, what is the difference? Like, people people fundamentally,
it's about the flags.
Look, it's about the flag, right? It's about the flags. Well, you and me, right? If we were down the pub every other week, we'd be getting along, no problem. But fuck your fucking flag, and I'll die for that. Like,
Well, that's an interesting thing, because it does have, I mean, human belief systems, and about how they impact our conceptual world, like our experience of feeling like that we're in a safe place, or that we're in a place that we understand and we can act in, is directly related to our belief system. So when a person threatens our belief system, it's not just these abstract ideas that we're it's our physical safety as well.
And you're emotionally attached to that.
Puncturing the space that you actually live in, and your emotions are controlled by your values. So it threatens basically, people will get their hackles raised up when you come after their values. And a lot of our values are inbuilt into us. They're to do with our genetics. They're to do with a lot of our personality comes from our biology as well. And that also is, an unfortunate fact that they're not our ideas all the time. They're ideas that we have because of
we have personality traits and temperaments.
That's why I think Stoicism is interesting, because I think it's survived for that long because of that universal human nature that we share. I mean, a lot of the things they deal with, birth, death, ill health, what you can control, what you can't control, are universal human things.
Yeah.
They go outside of the realm of just culture. They're kind of biological and physical limits that we have that creates a shared philosophy out of those. That's why I think it's kind of got some power now.
Exactly, and it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, black, white. It doesn't matter. Fundamentally, the one thing that we all can share in together is the fact that we have our minds, right? And that's the most powerful tool that we have. We can make any sort of nation state, but it all comes back to our minds. It doesn't matter. The nation state, it doesn't rely upon, okay, well, they have to be Catholic and they have to be Protestant and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, it's in our own minds and our ability to create these myths, right? Yeah. So this, like, when you look at institutions, look at the most powerful things that humans have created in the world. Like, fundamentally, they're all just their thoughts put into action, But
some work and some don't is the thing, because ideas have consequences. So with myths, you'll see, like, that was always the big kind of battlefield. Like, at the time of Aurelius and those guys, there was all these gods competing. And they'd have one god would supersede one, and it would be Zeus as the top dog, or it would be, Ares, or there'd be all these different kind of cults. Obviously, then with Constantine, that became Christianity. So out of the plethora of gods that were warring with one another, there emerged, the single idea of God.
However,
as one principle.
Here's an interesting thing within the Catholic religion of what they did when they were trying to convert people from paganism. Is that they brought in this idea of a single God, right? But at the same time, in the back door, they just brought in a load of saints. So they're like, oh, well, he's the saint.
They're kind of like the lower heroes, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, so they're like, okay, well, look, you guys are so attached to these multiple gods and people, and the gods who control the sky and the sea and so forth. So we're kind of going to bring them into the back door. They still exist, but only one God, right? The rest of them.
That's really interesting, because they did that with Rome as well, where it was like, okay, Rome is now covering all these massive cities, but you're all Roman, even though you have all these different tribes and everything. It's actually easier to just make everybody Romans than to keep them as slaves or try and control it.
Well, going back to that other point as well, when you have competing ideals, and ideals, right? Fundamentally, the balance is the most important thing. So for every, for you to have a left wing, you need to have a right wing. Those two things balance each other out, and that's kind of what creates stability. Of course, like, if you look at maybe people who have tendencies on the left, they're oftentimes a little bit more creative and so on, but people on the right are quite capable of actually running the institutions that can sustain those things. And then, so for every sun, there's a moon, and that's like Stoicism touches on that within nature. Nature and the universe is the only self-sufficient thing that there is, and it acts upon balance, right? It needs a summer for a winter, and it's all about this natural cycle, and they believe that humans were capable of that through ration, that we were able to balance the
that dichotomy between left and right is very interesting. Jonathan Haidt, who is a social psychologist, and he wrote The Righteous Mind, kind of goes into the differences there between people who are higher in openness to experience being more likely to be liberal, and people who are higher in orderliness more likely to be conservative. And those personality differences kind of creating the political differences. But the instability, it's like the two, but they're two, like, by design, those people are different, and there's going to be difficulties understanding each other, because those personality differences aren't just differences in how you see the world, they're differences in what you see. You'll see this a lot with events that happen at the moment, where people they don't even see the same thing happening from them. They come out with different facts about the same thing. And the problem is, there needs to be something above that dichotomy that makes sense of it, that can act as a bridge between them. Something like, honest conversation is one way of doing it. But why would people have that honest conversation?
There's rationale. So there's look, you can't, in my opinion, you can't have these discussions through social media. I think they're like, social media is an entirely emotive based platform, right? There's no room for nuance. It is the loudest, most outraged person wins the day. And that's why I really dislike it for anything in depth. I don't like social media. I put up a video the other day, actually, just talking about the housing crisis, and it was about 7 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that a lot of people actually engage with that, because oftentimes on Instagram, you see something that's like, oh, that's 30 seconds. Fuck that. I'm on to the next thing,
Yeah.
Like, it's quite funny. So, but people actually did engage with it, which was interesting. But, it is a very short form, click-based thing. It's clickbait or whatever, So look, if the most of your conversations or interactions with people are happening online, like, what is the odds that those conversations are going into depth in any which way? And then there's also the sort of thing of, there's oftentimes when you spend so much time online, you have an information overload. You have all of these information, all of these things going into your brain, which you haven't kind of released or talked, you kind of like, oh, I know all of these things because I've been reading and watching all these videos and stuff like that. And you kind of want to blurt that out. And then you take certain things that you've learned as fact and, oh, well, everyone would agree and believe in this. But it's not true. And that then fuels your biases, I suppose.
Yeah, and the making of others as well. It's always very tempting that the bad guy is out there somewhere, that it's whoever is your kind of opposite number, that they're the bad ones. If you're the left wing, it's the right wing. If you're the right wing, it's the left wing. It's always... Yeah,
and then a beautiful quote, I think, is it Epictetus? I'm not sure, but it's something along the lines of, in every man's mind, he's never wrong, Like, we all think that we're right, because we all have... because we rationale and we reason our opinions to be right to us, you know. So
that's also why I think it's that link between your physical safety and your conceptual safety a lot of the time, is because it can be difficult to separate the two at times, and you can feel like, because your beliefs regulate, or your values regulate your emotions, an attack on your beliefs can be an attack on yourself, and it becomes very hard to have that kind of relationship beyond that.
Yeah, well, there's a beautiful, like, an Epictetus quote, just to throw out one there, and like this one that really struck me, and I thought was very beautiful, and again, the most beautiful ones I find are always the ones that are very descriptive, and you can kind of imagine them quite well. But it says, when you point a finger at someone else, 3 fingers point back in your direction.
Yes, I love that.
I love that because anytime that you ever throw judgments out at somebody, you know, oftentimes you find when you're being judgmental towards someone, it's often a problem that you have that you're not addressing.
Yeah, I think that's something you kind of realize as you get a bit older as well, when you've kind of gone mad about stuff and then you've reflected on it and gone, oh yeah, that's, a lot to do with me is mixed up in that, all of that.
That's why I really value the relationship with sort of older people, and there's the woman on my road that I'm quite good friends with, she's in her 80s now, and we were out in her on her stoop doing our Stoicism session, and we're just chatting away, and she was like, well, how are you getting on throughout, it's been a year now, whatever, and I said, well, look, like, if I'm not happy here, I wouldn't be happy on a mountaintop, so unless, you can't, the idea, we use escapism quite often to be like, oh, well, only if I was in this car, only if I was in this house, only if I was in a sunny destination and so on and so forth, I'd be happy. Well, really and truly, if you can't manifest happiness in your current situation, the likelihood that you're going to do that somewhere else is, I think a lot of people find that when they move abroad.
There's a really interesting Seneca quote, actually, that is also based on that one, which he's saying to all the letters that he's writing to, I think it's Lucius, I can't remember his surname, but that he's been traveling and he's complaining about the traveling. And he says that you're exchanging one life for another when the thing you are looking for, the good life, is available everywhere.
Yeah.
You're looking for a good life, but you can actually have the good life, if you're practicing it properly, you could have it in dire conditions. You can still, that's kind of what the Stoics seem to be after, is to be able to have that good life in the face of adversity.
Like, it's foolish to think that every time you step outside your door, you're not going to come across. Now, you can hope, but hope, is there to be diminished. But no, look, you can. It's foolish to think that every time you step outside your door, you get in your car, you drive, that you're not going to come across a bad driver. The likelihood is that you're going to come across a bad driver. So instead of wishing that away, just wish that you're able to deal with the situation. Like, for you to, it's a blessing to be able to deal with that situation.
Yeah.
And so that's with Stoicism. Again, it's so pragmatic, and it's like, you can take a bit of Stoicism and put that into action right now or during the day, and just over time, then more and more you practice it because it's a skill. It's like meditation is a skill, conversation is a skill.
There were some stoic tools, I suppose, that kind of touch on that when you experience the emotion. Separating yourself from it. I don't know if it's specifically a stoic one, but you can speak about yourself in the third person. So you could say, "Man is angry," and it gives you this outside perspective on the anger. It's not literally, you that is angry. The anger is acting upon you. It's a separate kind of thing to your own mind, and then how you relate to it will see if it inflates it or if it makes it something that's more, manageable. There's a good one for worry as well that I got from Donald Robertson, which is worry postponement. So it's when you find yourself worrying, you just go, okay, I'm going to worry about this at 3:00 today. I'm going to sit in my worry chair, and that's when I'll worry about it. And you get it out of your head, like as if you're going to sleep and there's loads of noise in your head. So you go, look, I have to sleep. I'll think about this in the morning.
Yeah.
So you postpone it, and then when you sit down to have your worry, oftentimes the emotion is taken out of it, so it's not as
exactly. Oh yeah,
it lacks
big time.
the.
I think it's quite important not to reply to anything too fast if it's of any real substance, because again, when your impressions, aka your automatic reactions to things, if you get a serious message or something like that, you're probably not in the right state of mind to reply to it. Frankly, you're probably going to reply to that with too much emotion to be really rational about it. So I use this thing now. I've been working 7 days a week now for the last while, and I'm actually quite enjoying it. But that also means that I have to be really careful about how I manage my time.
Yeah.
And something that I found very, very useful for it was reminders. It's called Alarmed. This reminder app on my phone, and so. As the day progresses, as it goes on, I'm always kind of, okay, do this, but I schedule a time for it, and then if it's not the right time, then I'll schedule it again. But I never miss it out, and they're all very small tasks, but they help me sort of manage things quite a lot because
keep it organized.
I'm a forgetful person as much as anybody else is, and so. But again, it's like, okay, well, I've gotten this message now, and I'm busy right now. I can't really reply to this, but I want to give it the time and effort it deserves later on. So I put that in for I know around 6:15 in the evening. That's when I'll have a bit of time to look at that. So it's time management, and that's important to manage your stress levels because I've kind of reverted now again as I'm living in my monk-like state. I kind of get up naturally at 5 a.m. now. And,
nice.
And I love it though. I've been the person who could, I had to stay up until 1 or 2 a.m. most of the time. But now I'm in bed, passed out by 10, and I'm up at 5 every day.
Nice.
And it gives me that breathing space where no one else is awake to do all of the little small things that I have to do before my day begins.
Yeah.
And everything else then is a lot smoother because I found when I was putting everything off until the evening that I had already completed my day of work. I've gone home and I'm filthy. It's probably been raining and it's windy as fuck for the last 6+ months, and and so you don't really want to have your evenings chock-a-block with stuff. You can get very and
you want to be done before.
Well, you can get stressed out by that. So, like, as good as you can ever get at being stoic, let's say, or being in control of your emotions, there's always going to be ways to just be a friend to yourself, really, and help yourself through the day.
That's a really interesting point, being a friend here, and also that something that I've kind of learned about from Donald Robertson is the relationship with how emotions create thoughts. Like when you're angry, you have angry thoughts, but a lot of the time we mistake that for our own thoughts. So, if you're really sad, or if your thoughts will have a suitably negative tinge, but you can start to equate those thoughts for accurate reflections of the situation or reality. So to actually interrogate yourself a bit and ask for evidence of these things, if we're like, oh, I'm no good at anything or no good at this, you go, well, okay, let's look at the last 24 hours and be like, okay, well, you did this, you got out of bed, you managed to do this. Okay, you did work, that's good. Oh yeah, and you did this and you're doing that. And you go, oh, okay, you can build more of an objective picture of yourself rather than one that's just going to be flavored with the emotions and kind of actually cause more stress and more anxiety than it would.
I went to, I went down for my dinner this evening, and the news was on. I never really purposely put these things on. I like staying somewhat in the loop, but at a distance. And RTE comes on for a few minutes, and you just think, Jesus Christ, how like they transmit like the worst possible things. Like there's practically no good story every night, And I got this book recently enough, and I really recommend this book. It's called, I think it's Top 10 Global Trends That Every Smart Person Should Know.
Oh, is that Marion Troopy?
Yeah, I think that's his name. I've only kind of flicked through it. It's more of like I suppose you could call it like a coffee table book, but it's very good. Look, the points that it makes in it is that humans, by their own nature, often veer towards the problems because and we've always had these existential problems, and it's nothing new, like COVID and stuff like that. It's nothing new, really. But so it's very interesting. Like, but it just kind of shows that on like depending on what you value, obviously, but more or less everything is actually improving quite rapidly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, man, because I've been into Matt Ridley is one of them, Steven Pinker, Bjorn Lomborg. They're kind of known as the rational optimists. So guys that they look at the data and trends in society, things like 175,000 people being lifted out of abject poverty every day, no abject poverty by 2050, more people having electricity, more basically increase or decreasing of goods or decreasing of difficulty accessing goods and things like water and food, less famine, less child mortality, and that the trends are actually very positive. But the big problem is it's hard to create like a good clickbait article out of things are getting slowly better if you pay attention to the trends. Everybody's like, what? No, it must be the apocalypse. It's going to be climate change, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be COVID, or
it's far more exciting, really, isn't it?
But I think we're actually skewed that way biologically because we have so much invested in our safety.
In the age of the activists, let's say, like how should a person who feels frustrated by the system, engage with it in a meaningful manner rather than just through maybe online activism, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I guess the big problem is criticizing the system, because a lot of the time the system is so complicated that we have no idea. I mean, I've done a lot of economics, and a good book, if you want to understand economics a bit better, is Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics. And the problem with a lot of economics is it's really counterintuitive. They're not things that you understand by instinct because we're not actually designed for them. So a lot of the time we'll have instincts about things like, even he makes an argument against rent controls, and you're like, but rent controls seem like an obvious thing. We don't want it to be too expensive for people to live places, so you put a cap on the price of it. And then he says, but then less people occupy the houses, so then you'll have one person in each house, and people don't actually bunch in houses together, so it becomes more difficult for people to find housing.
Yeah, so we're actually seeing that in Dublin right now, funny enough, because there's very many vacant places.
All these unattended side effects and trade-offs and things that require very careful deliberation. So Peterson's idea is don't criticize social institutions carelessly. So the point is, if you're going to criticize them, fair enough. I mean, there's massive problems with them, but come with a solution rather than just criticisms. I mean, you are part of the institutions. We're not going to tear the system down because you'll absolutely destroy everything for everybody. So why not actually improve it yourself? Find a better way, find a solution. That would be being a real activist, would be figuring out a way to make it better rather than just complaining about what's bad about it. Because there's always going to be bad stuff.
To take extreme ownership of the situation, then you would say, all right, so-and-so has done this, and they think whatever. Again, in every man's mind, they're right, to themselves, so this is probably the same with you, but it's constructive criticism. I mean, look, I see this online often. There was a situation recently within the sort of Irish skateboarding scene where there were a lot of like claims of people like doing terrible things to women over the last couple of years.
I've seen some stuff about that, about kind of sexual assault and
you have to be very careful how you sort of address those situations because they're very touchy, and you don't want to give like, all right, fair enough. We're in. I suppose I'm in somewhat of a situation or a position of influence I'm not an influencer, right? I'm putting that out. Absolutely, I'm not. But there's a lot of people looking to you for like, well, what's happening, and sort of guidance in that sense. They're very, very difficult situations to know even what to do on. They happen so rarely, it's hard to say. And look, the route that we decided to go with was, we're going to address the situation, and okay, maybe the best thing to do is let's absolutely, you just have to be honest about it. But then we were like, okay, let's get onto the Rape Crisis Center. Let's talk to experts about what it is that we're saying, and whether or not we shouldn't be saying this, we should be saying this. Are we doing more damage or harm by leaving this out or putting this in and stuff like that? And it was very helpful for guidance. So you need to really involve people who know what they're talking about in these situations, and
to take your time with things to figure it out. I mean, a lot of the time there's a massive emphasis for people to immediately jump to conclusions about things and to pick sides immediately. But nothing is ever said. I mean, any news story I ever hear, I hear it and I go, okay, and then I go, I'm going to wait 4 weeks until this is completely different and it's something else entirely. As soon as I hear it, if I form an opinion on it, that opinion is already going to be wrong because I don't have enough information. And
you're too close to the situation.
But also, it's just these situations are generally, I mean, it depends on outside of, I suppose, the skateboarding stuff. Even when you hear, I mean, think about how many times COVID has changed. If you formed a hard opinion on COVID, you have been wrong hundreds of times.
Absolutely,
Every single day we're wrong more.
Here's a funny thing with how quick people's perceptions will change, because I remember like my mom's a nurse, and she's been a nurse in the Mater for 40 odd years, and around the early stages of COVID, when we supposedly didn't know much, although we certainly went into the harshest lockdown we could have. It was not seen to be a respectful thing to wear a mask out in public, because people in hospitals needed them. There was a shortage of them, right? And then there was a lot of arguments that, well, we don't really think that masks are going to make much of a difference anyway, So I think it was for the first like 5 months of COVID in this country, and certainly for the first period of lockdown, if you were wearing a mask, you were a fucking prick, And now it's like, it's the complete and polar opposite.
Yeah,
and so
I think Stoicism touches on that a lot. That Marcus Aurelius quote, which I really like, which is about being wrong. Basically, if anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake, or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change.
That is my favorite, one of my favorites,
because it's the truth I'm after, is what he says.
Exactly, and I love that. And so this is where I'm talking about, or touching on, when you want to have a form an opinion on something, or really get to understand something, Ray Dalio, who was probably one of the most successful financial, tycoons, whatever, of the last, couple of decades. Yeah. I've read his book, and it's very interesting. His whole philosophy for not just investing, but for life and stuff like that, and so forth, is to find, right, take a question or a theory, and find the smartest possible people that you can find, and kind of like let them have their say on it. And then after you've done that enough, you'll find that, okay, well, I can't find anyone who can tell me reasonably that this notion is wrong, so I'm going to go with it as a belief, and that's just science, right? But then also look at that from, a day-to-day person's perspective of, I'm not really sure how to address this situation, be it in a relationship or otherwise. Yeah. And if you're lucky, you have close friends who want your best interest, and you can address these issues with them, and they can give you an outsider perspective. Because oftentimes, again, your emotions are too closely attached to problems, and you can't address them rationally.
And that we're so flawed. Like, I really, I'm painfully aware of this because of how often I find myself to be wrong about things constantly. And
absolutely.
I think the best way of doing it is start with the assumption that you don't know everything. Begin from the place that there are things that you don't yet understand, and that the process of inquiry into it is what it's going to take for you to get even a little less wrong about it. Coming in saying, I know exactly what this is and I've solved it and everything, it's a surefire way to sound good and confident, but ultimately to have outcomes that you don't understand or that you haven't corrected for. And I mean, you can be well-intentioned, and you can be, you can have the moral high ground on the whole thing, But then if it produces unintended side effects that are really bad, that's
Oh, sorry, you
that's kind
cut
of
off of me there.
that's what you need to avoid. I mean, it's the outcome really that's going to be important, not how flashy you were when you did it. I think that's what Aurelius is kind of getting at. Yeah, when you have the moral high ground can actually blind you to the flaws in your own argument. It can make you say you're all filled with emotion and you're thinking I'm righteous and I'm this and I'm that, but it's actually acts as a cloud to the flaws in your own logic. And it's not necessarily going to be the flaws in somebody else's logic. I mean, it is as well because we're all flawed, but what stops you from seeing the truth is more often than not yourself.
Yeah.
It's
definitely
the presuppositions that you have that you're not willing to let go of in the pursuit of truth.
I always find that, I know less about something the more I know about it. And what I mean by that is, it's like from, like, I've been working in construction since I've been, every weekend pretty much since I was like 12, 13 years old. And I've been working at it full time for like 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I think I know something about it until I study it, and I'm like, fucking hell, man, how was I so wrong about this? I really hope I haven't implemented any of these idiotic notions into a building.
Yeah, well, sure, that's why Socrates was the wisest of all men, because he knew that he knew nothing.
Exactly, yeah.
So he strove for the truth then, because if you think you know something, you're not going to. That's another Epictetus one as well, where he says it's something to the effect of you can't learn something if you already think you know it.
Yeah, and don't worry about looking like a fool. Essentially, if you in the path towards trying to understand or gain knowledge, like, don't worry about looking like an idiot. In Jocko Willink's book, he talks about that a lot. Like, here's a guy who's in a situation of war, right? Yeah. And if anyone decides to kind of just not ask a simple question, whatever it is, that could mean someone is likely going to die. If someone's unsure of what building it is they're going to, what corner it is, whatever it is, like, the likelihood is that something seriously wrong is going to happen. Now, obviously, day-to-day life isn't as crucial, but if you kind of glance over things like that very often, it becomes habitual. Mm-hmm. There's very, like, it's the simple things, like, when on a building site, let's say, for instance, if you're, mixing cement for a bricklayer, mm-hmm. A wrong ratio of how much sand is going into the mixer by comparison to mm-hmm. cement can cause serious defects down the line. Mm-hmm. And it's a very simple thing, but and you might feel like an idiot. How much sand do I put in here along with this? And look, it's actually taken me years to kind of get that mix right. No joke. And it's like, well, how long have you been working on this fucking build site? You should know that, but better off you look like a fool then than later on, because the issues later, oh my god, the issues down the line are far greater. And take that into consideration from your day to day. It's like, oh well, I'm not too bad. I'm only drinking maybe twice a week or something like this. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Like, go out and enjoy yourself. But how often that's happening? Is that really not starting to affect on your relationship with your parents, or the time that you get to spend with yourself even? And are all the hangovers really worth it,
And just again, to touch on what you were saying, I mean, about, like, that mixture of sand in building that house is going to fuck up building the house. And you think that's like a small thing. But think how complex an economic system is of millions and millions of people, billions of people across an entire global economy of all these things that's too big for any one person to understand.
Absolutely.
And if you think you're going to radically change that instantly, you actually have some sort of kamikaze death wish, because it's like, it's crazy. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, the older I've gotten and the more I've worked, normal jobs and stuff, it's given me a sense of humility for how little I actually understand. And just what you said, the more I've learned, the more I've realized I don't know. The more educated you are, the more you realize you actually haven't figured out yet, or that you haven't grasped.
You're completely clueless. Like, you're full. Look, if you're young, you're full of ideals, as you should be, and then they kind of get crushed as you get older.
They get recycled after that first shift in Subway, and then you go, oh yeah, I'm not a sandwich artist.
No, exactly, yeah. And you know what? Funny enough, my occupation has probably aged me far more so than I should have. I probably have, I have it, like, with the shaved head and stuff, my appearance now is certainly somewhere in my late 30s, I'd say. And the beer belly that I had before I kind of went on this monk-like diet. I guess it wasn't helping either. And
that's your wisdom. That's your wisdom coming in, bro.
It's my wisdom belly. Yeah,
wisdom in the belly. That's it. There's a good one Seneca said, and it was something like, "Wisdom is the only asset that grows with time," or something. It's like that. It's the only thing that doesn't devalue. It actually gets better the more you go on. Exactly. That's what I like about Stoics as well, because like the body degenerates, you get fucking shitty hips, and you can't complain about stuff all the time. But their thing is kind of, they're valuing something else. They're valuing something like character.
It's the thing that you have, like, from the moment you're born till the end of it. It's the only thing that I think you can truly own is your own mind, and we don't take care of it very well. I don't think. I don't see in the modern world. I don't think. I don't think. Certainly not in the Romans' time either. That they were very flawed. You know. Yeah. They were. They were a lot of the time they were drunk and, you know, obviously going to barbaric. Well,
and
we view it as
barbaric. Murderers.
So with Seneca is an interesting one, because Seneca is like an upper middle class person, let's say, of the first world of his day, 2,000 years ago, let's say, you know, and you're like, well, I don't think that the problems that wealthy people today have are much different from him, you know. And he was saying, like, really, you know, the wealth and the wealth and status is futile. It's not gonna.
It doesn't stop the aging. It doesn't stop. Well, he's a really interesting character, because his philosophy and who he was are quite at odds with each other. Like, he was.
That's so true.
He was the tutor of Emperor Nero, who was.
I think there's a lot of criticism that you can kind of take towards Seneca in that he didn't. Or I don't want to say he was rhetoric, but I mean, like, here's a guy who, all right, Epictetus lived that life, you know?
Yeah.
And so did Aurelius. I think Aurelius was the culmination of all of these, like, all of this wisdom and put it into practice. But Seneca, you know, he was a bit of a bollocks, like, you know?
Well, he was kind of a professional propagandist. But when you read his work, it doesn't come across like that, which is really interesting. It comes across as very, very, very grounded and very like. So I just don't know enough about him. But
I think he was very well respected in literary circles. An amazing
writer, man. I couldn't believe it reading him. It's so modern. It's shocking. It really seems like it's far more modern than Shakespeare or anything, which is 15,000 years later. Or sorry, 1,500. It's not that. That's like future Shakespeare. That'd be weird. But he's so it's so relatable, similar to Aurelius, but in a slightly different way. But just the way he deals with you could imagine a guy saying it, some old fella telling you this stuff, like a wise guy nowadays would tell you the same things, despite having lived. And his analogy for the philosophy, which maybe touches on what we're saying here, which is that you always fall short of the ideal. Like, nobody is perfectly wise. Everybody is flawed. And how he reconciles that is he says, he uses this hospital analogy, that we're both sick, but he's just in a different hospital bed passing on some remedies that helped him.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I think that's really...
I think there's a funny part in the Epictetus book where he's kind of going on a rant to himself, really, and it's something along the lines of, you know, there's a guy complaining that, oh, well, I've been sentenced to death, you know, and he says, well, haven't the rest of us, like, you know, really?
That's such you're like, oh, nice one, Epictetus, thanks, bro. I have to go die now. I'm glad.
But it's such a, you know, it's again, like, I think any cool character in a Western or anything, they're always quite stoic, and they're the calm, cool, and collect guys under pressure. And it's, you know, you know, it's the guy you want to be, you know?
Just, I don't know whether... it for me is that it has that ideal. And I mean, Christianity, we could look at that, like, Christianity has kind of emerged out of that. So what I think happened, I was talking about this at the weekend, actually, interesting, talking about myth, that we all kind of, we've told all these stories again and again to try and remind ourselves of who to be. And they all became aggregated. And then out of that, we pulled the figure of Christ as kind of the King of Kings.
Yeah, the ideal.
Like the ideal man. And that Aurelius and guys like this are also kind of maybe earlier figures of this ideal man that we've kind of latched onto, maybe because we're not a religious society anymore. But that we're actually kind of doing the same thing, which is trying to find a dramatic representation of our lives that we can live out.
And you know, again, if you look at the decline of the Catholic Church in Ireland in the space of 20 years, it's quite amazing to me, because the whole countryside is littered with examples of this institutional myth, right? And the most beautiful, splendid buildings across the whole country, and more and more becoming unused in a sense. Their use is falling by the wayside, and it just goes to show like how such powerful institutions can deteriorate, right?
Yeah.
But amazingly, somehow Stoicism has managed to kind of make its way and adapt. Yeah, well, it's meant to adapt, though. It's not meant to be a static philosophy, and it's not meant to stay the same. I think Christianity is probably its downfall. Actually, is it's very static, right? And Stoicism is lucky in that it doesn't rely upon myth all that much to it is more scientific in
it's very philosophy. Practical and very much focused on your behavior and the human condition.
There's no arguments in Stoicism about whether or not that is actually the blood of Marcus Aurelius or not, right? They don't waste time on that. They would see that as rhetoric and sophists. It's just pointless. It's not going to help you in your day to day.
Do you think that's what then has taken the Catholic Church down? I mean, that and the corruption, obviously. But
just the corruption of the institution is just overwhelmed it. But then,
and a failure to adapt, I think, is correct.
Yeah, failure to adapt.
It's been it's so weird. I mean, I was completely born in exact opposition to the church. Like, such a fucking vicious atheist. I remember the other day in religion class in school, when the Gideons came in and they went around giving Bibles to everybody, and I made a point of refusing to take a Bible with these like 3 Gideons around my desk, thinking I was like, I don't know, some sort of Che Guevara or something, being like, no way. But little did I know there's so much wisdom in the past which we are in our small lives desperately need.
I do think that it was a failure to adapt. And you know what? I just off the top of my head there, I recall like the primary school that I went to. It was pretty diverse, like particularly for I think the time in Ireland. But Rathmines in general, it's like where I grew up. I think it is like the most diverse part of Ireland, if I'm not like it's very high concentration of people, and it's an interesting place in that you get like quite wealthy people, you get quite poor people, you get middle class, you get everyone. It's a whole mixed bag, and you often get like people from all over the world really often stay here in short-term lets or whatever. But we had a lot of people from all over different parts of the world in our primary school, and I recall going in to do our communion or confirmation, whichever one it was, and there was the whole class would go down to the church down the road, but about 6, 7 or more, like out of a class of 20 or whatever it was, 25 maybe, there was like a whole bunch of kids who just had to sit in the back of the church and read a book because they weren't partaking in it.
That was me,
and
bro.
It's like, but it's like, fuck me, like how, like that's one way to separate children for no necessary, it's not necessary, it's one way to divide up an entire classroom.
I wouldn't even do religion class, like initially I was to sit out of it, but it's a whole, and it's not something that's actually filled very easily. I mean, the reason we have these culture wars and the reason we have all these ideologies is because we have this religious impulse, and we will make religion of things. Even if they're not religions, we'll take political problems or economic problems and make them into, you could even take something like sobriety, and that could become a moral thing, as opposed to it's actually just something maybe that you're doing for your health or something.
I'm 2 months off the booze right now.
Oh, congratulations. You must be,
And so it's good listening to Hannah's podcast.
Hannah was really she's good. Such an inspiration. I've said it about 50 million times, but she is just like flying the flag.
She's a great woman.
And talking absolute sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, that's the religious side of human thinking, I suppose, is you want to simplify the world. If you think about like the times, hundreds of years ago or even to the present day, and that you want explanations for things. You want to know why it is that you've lost your 2-year-old child's sickness, and it's not as simple as, you can't take this explanation that, well, there was a certain disease and it was malnutrition or something. It's like, you wanted to latch on to meaning, and there has to be a reason for this terrible tragedy to come across you, right? And so that's the distinction with Stoicism, is that they they said, no, the only answer to this is our own reason. We have to come over these emotions and feelings. We can't allow ourselves to be taken away by, sort of a storyline.
But also in doing that, they kind of provide an answer to the problem, because we need coherence, as you pointed out. Like, we need to feel like certain events like that open up kind of a hole in our lives, and we're not satisfied until we can find an answer that fits. And sometimes we use substitute answers to put it in, but maybe that creates more problems than it solves. And I suppose it has outcomes in your life for what you want and for getting what you want and for pursuing, your life and relationships. And Stoicism may be the answer to that question of the suffering is kind of like, that's the gig.
Yeah. I would love for a lot of churches maybe to be replaced with Stoic ceremonies.
We'll just go back to the old paganism. And,
every Sunday, but I don't know.
Stoic lecture. That'd be good.
The idea again with Stoicism is that it's not supposed to center around any one person, and it's but the problem then you might get is, well, maybe Christianity was the same initially, but then you get power hungry motherfuckers who will abuse their stance.
I as I've said on the podcast so many times, like, I have no idea how to reconcile organized religion with the religious ideas that I've come to understand. Like, me being in a church is like probably you being in a mosque or a synagogue. Like, I don't understand any of it. I literally sit there like with the stand up, sit down, say prayers, and none of it has. I don't understand it. I understand, but I was blown away. Like, I went to St. Peter's Basilica, and I was like, it just reminded me like it was a big play or something. It was like theater. But a play that I didn't understand, and that was like the most amazing story possible. But I just didn't get it.
I'm usually too intrigued in the construction of the church itself to ever even think about it. I'm just so taken aback about the beauty and the craftsmanship that goes into it.
But they did that knowingly. Like, the churches and the cathedrals were supposed to be representations of the soul in line with that sort of metaphysical principle, designed to be like harmony of culture and nature. Where they look like, forests, but they have the same kind of
beautiful.
Buildings.
Like, even in a day and age where you can mass produce things, you never get buildings that beautiful again. And
or people that cared about buildings that much.
Or people who cared about it, right?
We don't really do that anymore. We're just we'll just build the fucking building.
I'm actually working on a church at the moment. So there's Molyneux Church, and it's the section that we're working on was an old blind asylum, and just being in that building every day, well, the craftsmanship that went into it, this is a 170-year-old building.
Wow. And
every day when you're inside of it, it's like, it's amazing to me, the things that they were capable of doing and the thought and effort that they put into it. It's astounding. Now, I believe it took 11 years to build. Right? So, but these guys were, they didn't have cranes or machines. There was guys with picks and shovels and winches and stuff like that, So the effort that went into it is so incredible.
I'd say you have a lot of empathy for the job that they have to do, considering how you're doing it, but with all that equipment.
I cannot believe it. I lift like one of the stones that they lift, and it's all of my strength and energy. And they're doing that every day with hundreds of these blocks. These stones, this granite blocks. It's incredible. But nothing is off a single millimeter. Everything is completely perfect, and the building has stood the test of time. I make that point in the previous article on death, in that we often, like in our buildings previously in cities, we did design them quite often with more philosophy in mind, in that we made death a more prominent part of our lives. Whereas today everything is very banal and there's not much thought really.
Yeah, the beauty, the idea of beauty that goes into them a lot, that it's supposed to represent the kind of, their motivation for building a church like that. Why not just slap something up? Like, why make it? Why try and make it so perfect or so beautiful? And what would motivate you to do that? The belief. And some churches, have been being built, like Sagrada Familia, for like fucking 300 years or something. You're building a church you're never even going to get to see. And you're like, what is the... I can barely fucking write an article for more than a week, or I'm like, go God, we'll do another one.
It's quite funny as well, right? Is that within Stoicism, I mean, like, you're literally, it's a stoop. It's a fucking stoop. You're like, right, that's your lot. You're happy with the step that you're on. You know, if you're not fucking happy here, you won't be happy anywhere else. So deal with it, right? And then some cunt comes with a fucking power hose and like power squirt steps or some shit and washes you down and tells you to get the fuck off, go somewhere else, like, you know.
Fuck off.
That's the Irish reaction to it, you know. We're like, some fella took a piss around the corner the other week, so no one's allowed to use this anymore. I'd
say Irish philosophy definitely has serious parallels with it, because I suppose our history has been so bloody and so
absolutely. Think about how you know, like, very passive, I suppose. We've been beat into passiveness.
Yeah, we're so chill just because of the PTSD that's been passed down.
But isn't it interesting when you look back on like Irish rebellious history and how often it was like a handful of lads being like, "Come on, let's do this," and everyone else is just like, yeah, maybe. What day are you going? You going on Wednesday? I have to do this thing. Look, I'll let you know.
Nobody shows up to the rebellion. You're like, lads.
No one shows up, but by the time people know that it's on and they go, they're like, "Oh fuck, this is already over, man."
Because they know they're all going to get martyred. Like, they have. There was an interesting one. I was chatting to my dad that actually, because he was writing a thing about Catholic martyrs, about when Protestantism came into effect. King Henry made a rule that you could, as a Protestant, kill any Catholics legally and take their property.
Yeah.
I think that was in the early 1600s.
Yeah, 1640s, I'm guessing, thereabouts, probably.
I'm not sure the exact date, but
tumultuous time
this
here.
resulted in tons of Catholic martyrs, basically, that were martyred for their faith. So they were told, unless they converted, they'd be killed. So, and not just killed, like disemboweled, burned, hung up from trees, decapitated, like
all the good stuff. And Epictetus would reply to that and be like, "All right, well, are you going to do that now, or can I have my lunch first?"
That's so, man. It just reminds me of The Life of Brian. Do you ever see that, where he's like, "Crucifixion's a double."
Well, I love that. He's like, "Look, you know, I don't. My body's not even my own. Do what you like. I mean, you can't fuck with me." Basically, you know.
There's a good story of him having his leg broken. I don't know if it was by Nero or by one of them, that his master was torturing him and just rotated his leg, and he said, "If you keep doing that, it's going to break." And then it broke, and he goes, "See what you've done."
Yeah. And then I don't know, your man was slagging him or something, and he just goes, "Well, do you know what? Lameness is an impediment of the leg, not the mind." And it's like the most badass. Imagine. Like, if someone said that to you, it's like shooting someone in the fucking neck and then just being like, "Do it again." You know?
No problem, man. The neck is just a neck.
Yeah. The neck is just a neck. It's not even my own. You know, so it's powerful.
I didn't get into Epictetus as much because I bought a weird book. It's just his book. I think it's just a collection of his writings, but I don't think it's been very well translated because they're very.
If anyone's looking to get them, I'd certainly just recommend like the Penguin classics. They're probably the most reliable.
Yeah, Letters of a Stoic, Seneca, Meditations, Discourses of Epictetus, Donald Robertson's books. How to Think Like a Roman Emperor.
It's brilliant. It's a very good introduction.
Philosophy of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy.
But also one that I had there I actually have this for work, so I take 5 minutes every day to read this in work now. Is Ryan Holiday's? Was it 365 Stoic mantras or something like that? Yeah. So every day, you know, you go on to another teaching, and it's beautiful. It just takes 2 minutes, man. You read it, and you're like,
his one, The Obstacle is the Way, is supposed to be very good as well.
He's the more so. Ryan Holiday is the more, you know, he's a modern day Stoic, I suppose you call. He's if you want to learn about Stoicism quite easily, YouTube.
He's got those videos with the Daily Stoic, and then, it's a great entry into the philosophy.
And then it's interesting to just think about people who kind of embody that for you. And again, Jocko Willink is probably one for me, and then Donald Robinson as well, and the interesting link with CBT, and then you think about characters, probably your favorite characters throughout TV series and movies. They're oftentimes people who take on the harsh challenges.
Embody those characters. And the values of Stoicism, I think, which are like wisdom, temperance, courage. What was the other one? Wasn't beauty. I can't remember what that.
I should probably. I spent like all weekend reading, and I know.
But they're kind of the basics. I suppose applying the path of wisdom to your life. I mean, that's a higher order moral principle which you can follow. So, like we talked about, people not being able to talking at each other and having these difficulties in communicating. If you're both looking for the truth, it'll take you over the hurdles that are in between you.
Yeah.
It's a way of connecting things together that don't make rational sense, but it has this kind of this power to pull out what could happen, I suppose, to actualize what's potential in that you might not be able to do unless you follow this principle.
Yeah.
By telling the truth and by saying, by following wisdom.
Like, these are all habitual, like these are all habits that you can build over time, slowly but surely. I mean, I've only really delved into Stoicism heavily in the last few months. Although that said, I've kind of, through trial and error without knowing it, I've been doing a lot of these things over the last few years, and they've definitely stood to me. I find it very easy to. So there's a saying, it's persist and resist. So I find it easy to kind of, all right, I'm not going to drink for like a couple of months, whatever. And it's just I've over years of sort of taking things away, to test myself. Is it social media, the news, or drinking, or whatever it may be? All right, I'm going to change that, and then I'm going to persist in trying to do whatever it is. Aside from, if I'm not drinking, all right, well, I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to get up and I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to read, and I'm going to, whatever, try and do better and work and stuff like that. So I'm going to compensate. It's all about compensating, you know. And again, it's a balance, man. Everything just comes back to a balance. And so I love that. It's very corny looking to most people now, I suppose, but the sort of the black white with two dots in the middle. So like that's your foot in either side, right? And that like you're standing in between. This is your balance, and and this is quite important, I think, in today for people, and particularly like you see in politics so often. It's like there's very stark divides, but really, without the left there is no right, and without and these things need each other to actually exist.
And that the truth comes above all of the rest of that. That's kind of
somewhere in the middle there. There's a truth grounded in between those two,
and it's not any one person's. Nobody owns it. No. We all have to try and cooperate to find it. The last Stoic value was justice and the moral instinct.
Exactly.
To discern, I suppose, right from wrong. That's another interesting thing, I suppose, that they say that virtue is its own reward and vice its own punishment. So it's kind of like the idea of karma, where it's like what you do is what happens to you. So if you do virtue, your life will be better. If you're doing vice, it's gonna create in you more desire for more trouble.
So you'll find this story in Epictetus when you read it. It's very funny. He talks about someone stole his lamp, right? And he said, "Well, I can just go and buy another lamp. I'll get a cheaper one next time. It'll attract less thieves anyway." However, the thief who stole that lamp from me, okay, he's up a lamp and I'm down a lamp, let's say. But he's also damaged his character. He's proved to himself that he's no longer trustworthy. He's damaged himself. Whereas me, it's actually given me the opportunity to practice, calmness and forgiveness. So it's like with everything that ever happens to you, there's always an opportunity lying in there somewhere. And I think I would have been a very pessimistic person for a long time, especially throughout my teenage years. But you can switch that, and again, it's habitual. If you can change that kind of, okay, well, where's the positive in this? Where's the opportunity? Okay, well, like someone just cut me off and nearly ran me over on my bike, but it's an opportunity for me to actually show restraint and just understanding, I suppose. Okay, fuck it, this person probably wasn't paying attention to what they're doing. Maybe they're distracted because whatever it is that they're having a bad day. Now that said, I freaked the fuck out at someone the other week for doing exactly just that.
It's like throw you on the news throwing a brick at them, like local Stoic Philly Halton.
Like I have a bad temper, and this is why Stoicism it comes in handy for me if I can put it into practice right. But like this guy nearly hits me and my friend off our bikes by being a careless driver, and instead of the good thing to do would have been just brush it off and don't react. Just it is what it is. Instead, I got off my bike and started threatening to kill this person. So,
nice.
and then he said,
not
"Fuck
to
you,
encourage murdering
fuck
people.
you baldy prick." And I said, "I'm not bald, mate. I'm just shaving my head." And then he called me a stead head, and I was like, "Fucking,
what does that even mean?"
It's a steroid abuser, and I said that's the best fucking compliment I've gotten in months.
Jack, bro. That's it. But what you were saying, that story with Epictetus, that kind of runs really central to Stoicism, is that, a good character is the only guarantee of a carefree, happy existence.
Yeah.
Because if you corrupt your character, you're always looking over your shoulder. You're always like, your conscience is always going to be in you. So whatever about the world, you'll know that you've gone against yourself in this sense. You've betrayed your inner authority.
There's a Newton's third law, I think it is. It's for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and I think that rings so true with morals, particularly, and just your actions in the world. Like there's no free lunch in the world. There's never anything that doesn't have consequence. For every time that you slack off of work, or you do something that you shouldn't have, like there is a consequence to that. And again, it can happen, through habits. Like your habits have now taken a hit. You've now gained a worse off habit. And I know I've heard you say this before. It was something like, do every choice that you make is a vote towards what type of person that you want to be.
Exactly. I was just thinking that, man. That it's like the story that you tell yourself. Even if you get away with it, you're going to damage your own self-respect, because next time you go into that situation, you're going to know. And we all do things that betray ourselves at times and that aren't that good. But if you make that your path in life, you're going to suffer immensely because of it. And you're going to know it inside. No reward will be enough. Yeah. It will always be a damaged character. And that's, a punishment in itself.
There's a very like grounding sense in Stoicism as well, and that it just treats everything as equal, really. And there's a good quote there for Alexander the Great and his mule driver, both reduced to dust, made equals by death. And it's like, no matter what status you had in life, ultimately the most powerful man in the history of the world and his mule driver just meet the same fate. So there's the sort of the hollowness that the Stoics would find in chasing so much wealth,
chasing the status and all that it's fleeting.
Yeah, so like again, it's not that you shouldn't do these things. It's not that you shouldn't push yourself. It's everything positive like that is preferred. Yeah. But again, not at the expense of your character. Like there's no point in, all right, you can make a €1,000 today, right? But what do you have to do for it? If it was something that was going against your values, would you do it? And I think a lot of people would, and then it's like, is money the only thing that we value? Really? Yeah. Like every time that we choose money over something that we think is right or wrong, and we go down the wrong path, well, it's not just that we're gaining €1,000; we're also losing something inside.
You're losing something. What could be in the alternative? It's something I've been thinking about a lot, because I've been making a lot of plans, and I've been really trying to obviously trying to be a writer and to make a living out of writing, and really hammering down on that, trying to do my best and just throwing myself against the wall. But you realize when you become so fixed on an outcome, you lose the possibility of adventure, because there's all these other things. Like, we don't necessarily know what our fixed destiny is, or what the best thing to be doing is. So if you fall in love with a false god or with something that you idolize, what you lose really is what your life actually could be, or you
lose your freedom. Actually, I think that's a point what Epictetus would make, is that every time that you enslave yourself to a pursuit, you actually you enslave yourself. So let's say it's like, I am going to make getting this car my number one priority, and nothing else is going to get in my way. Well, now you're enslaved to that idea, and anything that gets in your way, be it your friends or your family or any other thing, is now second to that. And and people will do what they have to do, or what they feel like they have to do to pursue those goals. Yeah. And he makes a very interesting point in that with the people that you associate with are very important for that reason, because if you want good friends, you have to find out exactly what it is that they value. Do those friends value other friends and family as much as they value, let's say, a better, a status on more status or more wealth or something like that? Yeah. Because if wealth and status are above their friendship and family desires, or what they deem as valuable, then they will put those first, and you will be second. And so that's very,
and you'll suffer
and you'll suffer the consequences. It's deep, It's something along the lines of if you roll with people who are who are muddy, or if you associate with people who are muddy, eventually, it's
yeah, you get down with
rubs
dogs,
off.
you wake up with fleas or something. There's
Yeah,
an interesting antidote to that in Seneca, which is, I kind of thought it was like an antidote to greed, which is that if you desire something very badly, and how to figure out if it's, he says natural or not, but in that case it would be like good or bad. You have to decide, ask yourself whether it is capable of coming to rest at any point. If after going a long way there is always something remaining farther away, be sure it is not something natural. So if you're always chasing money for the sake of money, and there's never going to be enough money, you're not going to be like, okay, this is enough. Like if it's 1 million, what about 1,000,001? What about 2 million? What about 3 million?
Absolutely.
So to be aware of these false paths that you can fall down that are just endless, they're a trap in itself that you can just kind of hamster wheel on.
Yeah, and again, look, a lot of these things are, as they would say, is preferred, but not there is a price to everything.
Yeah,
absolutely everything.
Oh, I'm totally not against earning money or fast cars or any of that shit, to be honest. But it is just, if that's the end in itself, it becomes all consuming.
Yeah, and they would say also as well is that again, you have what the Stoics would call indifferent. It's the things that are neither bad nor good. They're just indifferent. And wealth they would view as indifferent, but how you utilize it and spend it, or how you earn it, is not. That could be done through good or bad means.
Yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's so relevant to today, I feel like.
It is. It's always just, strikes me as so modern, as I've said a few times. That's why it's so useful, and it fills a hole. It fills a hole that's needed for a lot of people, for everybody, not just necessarily young men, but a path of discipline, or an ideal that you can follow. And I think their ideal of wisdom, temperance, the kind of self-mastery, justice, courage, that's pretty good. I mean, if you could be doing some of that in your life, I think people would really admire it, and that would be a good thing.
And again, just continuous behavior, and it's going to instill those habits. And if you're doing the bad behaviors, it's going to confirm those old ones as well. It's So like it is very valuable. I really recommend anyone who's interested in it to
check it out. This has just been a nearly 2-hour advertisement for Stoicism. Like we're not getting paid by them.
Sponsored content. Yeah.
We're volunteers, but this podcast is
exactly
sponsored by the ghost of Epictetus.
Yeah. One is a balding fat builder, and the other one's a failed writer.
Hey, what the hell?
Or should I say?
At least let me fail first, all right?
One is a balding builder, and the other is a failing writer.
A failing writer. That's better, all right? It's in process. So do you mind?
Well, I really enjoyed this, man. And again, it's nice. It's the first person I've talked to in 8 weeks, as I have lived like a monk and not socialized or.
Man, well, I appreciate you coming on, and always an illuminating conversation, man.
Yeah, and also, not that I've been talking, but I've been listening, and I've been listening to a lot of people who really appreciate this podcast, and they've found
sweet, brother. Good to hear.
A lot of value in it. I think it will continue to do so as well. So
100%, more conversations, more ideas. And get a bit more community, I think, is the aim of it in the end.
100%.
But all right, dude. Appreciate it, brother.
Talk to you later.
Chat to you soon.
Boom. Congratulations. You just sat through 2 hours of hardcore thinking. You must be absolutely inspired right now. I really hope you enjoyed that chat with myself and Philly, and are considering possibly looking into Stoicism yourself and learning a bit more about these ancient arts and feeling connected to your roots in history. If you want to support the podcast, there is a link to the Buy Us a Coffee page in the description. Also, you can pick up my book if you want to support me and help me not be a failing writer, which would be very much appreciated. You can get it at the link in my bio. It's $7.99 for the next while on sale. Collection of 12 short stories which are comedic and philosophical about ordinary people with deep moral problems that we can all relate to. Yeah, I'd love to know what you think about it. And as always, stay saucy. Oh.